Welcome to the GBC's Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment Public Webinar. My name is Harris. I'm the Program Officer for the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment at GBC. So this is the first of our Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment Public Webinar in 2023, where through this series of public webinars, we will walk you through every part of the commitment. Today, we will talk about the business and organization pathway. When businesses sign up to the commitment, we will support them at every part of the commitment. We will support them at every part of the onboarding process as well. So we hope you get interested in joining us and have a better understanding of the commitment initiative. So here is our agenda today. We will introduce Advancing Net Zero and Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, the business pathway. We will also go through the requirements of the commitment, so as to get you familiar with what signatories have to commit under the commitment initiative. We will also walk you through the latest achievement of the commitment initiative, an overview of our business signatories, benefits to you, and the climate initiative ecosystem. To start with, on your screen now are examples of sustainable buildings from our case study library and from existing signatories, the commitment in action. The need for further action, urgent action, is critical. The recent AR6 IPCC report states that human influence is unequivocal in relation to climate change and that the scale of recent changes to climate are unprecedented. That global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius will be exceeded during the 21st century unless deep reductions in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions occur in the coming decades. That means we must act now. For the built environment, this means we must use all of the tools at our disposal in the right ways to transition towards a net zero carbon, healthy, equitable, and resilient built environment as soon as possible. Advancing net zero emissions is a journey and an integral part of a wider systemic shift towards a more sustainable built environment. As part of the transition towards total sector decarbonization, GBC advocates for a holistic approach to sustainability that also enables tangible environmental and social co-benefits in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Signatories to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment are advancing net zero by facilitating and accelerating market transformation. Their commitment represents a leadership position within the buildings and construction sector in taking action further and faster to decarbonize the built environment. Through this action, we seek to engender sector transformation that will allow mainstream actors to achieve the goals set out within GBC's Sustainable Buildings for Everyone, Everywhere strategy. The commitment is an example of the ambition loop in action. Signatories are advancing climate action within their own buildings portfolio to demonstrate what is possible and advocate for change through their business activities. Government of all levels are responding to these signals of readiness by setting policy roadmaps and targets, creating the confidence in investors and supply chains to activate low carbon solutions ahead of mainstream regulations and uptake. We hope that through the commitment, remaining barriers will be overcome to further initiate market transformation to enable mainstream uptake of solutions. The commitment promotes a reduction-first, outcome-based approach, allowing the flexibility for signatories to develop a bespoke action plan for their specific portfolio profile based on best practice principles towards reducing both consumption and emissions, with any reporting of verified progress towards decarbonization goal. Through gathering data to inform low carbon choices, relevant benchmarks and targets can be set, best practice methods incorporated, associated costs reduced, and greater uptakes enabled, accelerating market transformation and leading to significant sector emissions reduction. The commitment initiative follows the target and action set out in GBC's 2019 report, Bringing Embodied Carbon Upfront. It also promotes leadership action in addressing operational carbon and accounting for embodied carbon as part of a whole life carbon approach to sustainable development. In order to also prevent and mitigate embodied emissions, increase resource efficiency, and stimulate the development and market supply of low carbon products, the setup must, number one, reduce and account for its impact on the environment and natural resources through design and construction. And number two, generate a strong and urgent demand signal to supply chains and investors to activate the necessary finance to decarbonize heavy industry processes. By setting ambitious absolute targets, the commitment gives a framework for entities to develop globally ambitious yet locally relevant, flexible, universally viable solutions for their assets and portfolio to reduce energy demand, advance net zero carbon operations, and tackle embodied carbon emissions. By becoming a signatory and leveraging the vast experience of other signatories and partner organizations, participants can demonstrate to industry the level of action required to advance decarbonization and stimulate wider uptake. Now, on your screen, you will see the two documents. On the left is the introduction for business and organization signatories. These contains all of the information about the requirements of the commitment. On the right is the publication called Advancing Net Zero at Whole Life Carbon. That explains our position on offsets. I will further elaborate on this later. So what is now required for commitment signatories is that there are two fronts. On operational carbon, we require signatories to commit all assets under direct control to reduce and compensate where necessary all operational carbon emissions by 2030. Operational carbon calculations of Scope 1 and 2 emissions must now include refrigerant emissions and manufacturing or process loads. And on embodied carbon front, we require signatories to commit all new developments and major renovations of existing assets to reduce and compensate for residual upfront emissions and embodied carbon emissions by 2030. What do we mean by this? Signatories must strive to achieve the maximum reduction in embodied carbon relative to the project and local context. Signatories should also carry out whole life cycle assessment or other relevant methodologies to inform their decisions as part of a whole life carbon approach. Once maximum reductions in embodied carbon have been achieved, there will inevitably be residual upfront embodied carbon emissions that have been incurred. World GBC is now calling for signatories to account for all of these emissions and compensate or offset the residual upfront embodied carbon that remains. Signatories should follow the principles set out by World GBC when applying these new requirements to their business activities, as I will outline with an example. If we take the example of a developer who is looking at their next project, first, they should be exploring opportunities to prevent, that is, to avoid embodied carbon from the outset by considering the alternative strategies to deliver the desired function. For example, perhaps they could pursue the renovation of existing buildings rather than new development, etc. However, should they decide to pursue a new asset, they should engage with their partners across the building value chain to reduce and optimize, evaluating design choices with a whole life cycle approach and minimize upfront carbon impacts. Within this process, they should plan for the future, take steps to avoid future embodied carbon during and at the end of life. For example, to maximize potential for renovation, future adaptation, circularity, etc. Finally, they must compensate for residual emissions, that is to offset residual upfront embodied carbon emissions with high quality, credible compensation activities. There are 5 key components in the framework of the commitment, where each component contains certain requirements that a business signatory has to commit. The requirements are also set for signatories to address both operational carbon and embodied carbon. These tables and the details of the requirements have been written in the introduction document. Now I will go through them one by one. So in the commit section, we require signatories to, on operational carbon front, that is, to commit assets under direct control to reduce and compensate where necessary all operational carbon emissions by 2030. Operational carbon refers to building level energy related Scope 1 and 2 emissions, including refrigerants and manufacturing or process loads. And on embodied carbon front, we require signatories to commit all new developments and major renovations under direct control to reduce and compensate for residual upfront emissions, embodied carbon emissions by 2030. So upfront embodied carbon refers to the Module A in the life cycle assessment as per EN 15978 standard. Signatories should also measure, consider, and plan actions to tackle embodied carbon emissions in the Module B to D in the life cycle assessment. And in the Disclose section, we require signatories to measure and publicly disclose the energy consumption data and whole life carbon emission data. Signatories also need to report to us annually. The performance data to report includes what I have listed here in this slide. Signatories will have 2 years of grace period since joining to do the reporting to us. And in X section, signatories are required to develop and implement a decarbonization roadmap that includes the measure listed in this table, in this slide. The decarbonization roadmap involves presenting the targets that you have set forth in these areas. That is, the energy efficiency, renewable energy, on-site and off-site, offsets, as well as maximizing reduction of embodied carbon. Signatories will need to produce an action plan too. The action plans include the concrete actions that you have taken and planned at the asset level or portfolio level. In reporting, you will be asked to categorize these actions into the areas that I've mentioned just now. And in verify session, the idea is that we want to get your data verified by an independent third party or market mechanism. So when reporting to us, signatories have to verify the reporting data before submitting to us. There is no specific list of verifiers. Instead, we remain flexibility for signatories to look for any verifiers, as long as the verification follows a certain standards or requirements as listed in the detailed document. And in the advocate session, we want signatories to demonstrate leadership through core business activities that contribute to understanding and reducing whole life carbon emissions and help facilitate the wider advancement of net zero whole life carbon buildings throughout the supply chain and the wider industry. So we want you to describe your advocacy actions that influence your stakeholders throughout your value chain. For example, suppliers, customers, policymakers, developers, etc. So far, the commitment initiative has obtained significant achievement. Right now, we have, as of now, we have 172 businesses, cities, states, and regions that have signed up to the commitment. So this includes 137 businesses, plus 29 cities, plus 6 states and regions. So for business signatories, they account for around 20,000 assets, representing around $400 billion annual turnover. And at COP27, the commitment is recognized as a delivery partner and breakthrough initiative for the UN High-Level Climate Champions 2030 Breakthrough Agenda. With what signatories have committed to addressing operational carbon and whole life carbon of buildings by 2030, they are front runners in the race to zero. Among our total 172 signatories, as what I've mentioned, 137 business signatories. Here is the demographics of our business signatories. Over half of our business signatories are based in Europe, especially UK and Finland. We thank UK GBC and Finland GBC for their great support to our commitment initiative. And in Asia Pacific, the majority comes from Australia. Regarding the business types of the signatories, we see a significant portion of them that are REITs and asset managers, where the real estate funds committed to the net zero targets as required in the commitment. We also see a significant portion of signatories that are professional service firms like architects, engineering, or environmental consultancy firms. They not only act as the role model to decarbonize their occupied office assets, but also they focus on advocacy actions towards their clients and value chain partners, driving their buildings to achieve the targets that we set forth in the commitment initiative too. Overall, with the framework set out in the commitment initiative, we aim to enable mainstream uptake of net zero carbon buildings. We believe the commitment initiative can bring a wide range of benefits to businesses. Business signing up to the commitment are joining the global cohort of leadership and get recognized at the global stage. Signatories are advancing net zero with their actions and business activities, both locally and globally. Through this commitment initiative, we foster knowledge sharing and collaboration between signatories. Meanwhile, they can access to resources of local guidance and worldwide cases that enable themselves to advance their decarbonization actions. On the communication side, we champion work by signatories across global communications output and channels. And we encourage our network of local GBCs to support such communications efforts too, so as to amplify signatories' achievement in decarbonizing their building portfolios. Talking about World GBC's position on offsets, the process involved in the building and construction industry, including material production, transportation, construction process, and building operations, are intrinsically carbon intensive. A bold and radical approach is required to reduce and compensate for emissions from the building and construction sector. A transition to a fully decarbonized building and construction sector requires a complete and unprecedented migration away from fossil fuels in building operations. So that includes both new and existing buildings, supply chains and construction processes, as well as maximizing opportunities for circularity in materials and buildings. Therefore, in addition to aggressive emissions reduction strategies via effective high-performance building design, and until necessary design, technological, and supply chain interventions can be adopted as business as usual. Residual emissions may remain, particularly when pursuing net zero whole life carbon. Compensating for the emissions we cannot prevent today will support acceleration of the decarbonization agenda that is critical to achieving the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris climate goal. Although World GBC recognizes that in the long term, achieving net zero means neutralizing residual emissions with carbon removals, sector-based compensation offsets and non-credit-based actions can be part of a holistic approach to sustainability that supports the SDGs. In the short term and medium term, sector-based compensation efforts can enable tangible environmental and social co-benefits, such as improved air quality, access to renewable energy, and quality of life. Now, I will hand it to my colleague, Matt, to talk about the climate initiative ecosystem.
Thank you, Harris, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone on the call. My name is Matt, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Advancing Net Zero here at World GBC. The next few slides I want to take you through are all about explaining the relationship that the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment has with other climate initiatives in the industry. A question that we often get asked is, how does your commitment align with others, and what relationship does it have? And so hopefully this will go some way to explaining that. On your screen, you can see what we've described as the Climate Initiative's ecosystem map. And really, it's a decision tree that can help prospective businesses understand which climate initiative is right for them. You can see various initiatives displayed on your screen, but if we go to the right-hand side, you can see such initiatives as Science-Based Targets, SME Climate Hub, and Amazon's The Climate Pledge. All three of these initiatives are partner initiatives of the UN Race to Zero campaign. Within this, we strongly encourage all prospective commitment signatories to join one of these other initiatives so that they can become a member of the Race to Zero, setting a net zero target for the whole scope of their entity's emissions. However, we also believe that leaders in the built environment can go further and faster, taking accelerated action on their buildings portfolio by 2030, which will ultimately contribute to the overall net zero targets set as part of these other initiatives. This is why we then recommend that leaders join our net zero carbon buildings commitment to take that accelerated action. Indeed, beyond even this sector-specific initiatives, such as the net zero carbon buildings commitment, prospective signatories can go further, potentially joining up to a material-specific initiative, such as the climate groups Concrete Zero or Steel Zero, or other stakeholder-specific initiatives, such as Architects Declare. Next slide, please, Harris. This relationship is important as it helps to highlight how actions within different initiatives also contribute upwards to your overall net zero goal. At World GBC, our relationship with the Race to Zero campaign and the high-level champions has been growing as we continue to work on collaboration and alignment between our initiatives. Indeed, as Harris mentioned earlier, in the lead up to COP27 in 2022, the World GBC 2030 Whole Life Carbon Vision target was recognized as one of the Race to Zero 2030 breakthrough human settlement built environment targets. And that is that by 2030, 100% of projects completed in 2030 or after should be net zero carbon in operation, with at least a 40% reduction in embodied carbon. Next slide, please. This is crucial as we are trying to accelerate the action in terms of decarbonizing our built environment. And as a result of this, the Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment was named as one of the levers of change and a delivery partner for the High-Level Climate Champions 2030 Breakthrough Agenda. This means that commitment signatories are frontrunners in the Race to Zero, taking accelerated action to tackle both operational and embodied emissions from their real estate assets by 2030, stimulating innovative approaches, solutions, and business models, and ultimately contributing to achieving the built environment sector breakthrough goals. This is a really important point that we want to stress because we want to highlight how joining multiple initiatives is also sometimes an important step to do so that you can get recognition at different stages. Next slide, please, Harris. Finally, I want to highlight a special relationship that the World GBC's Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment has with the climate group's EP100 initiative. The Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment acts as a membership pathway to the EP100 initiative. So if you join the Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment, you can also participate in EP100. EP100 is all about making energy efficiency a central pillar to net zero. Energy efficiency is the fastest, cheapest, and most accessible energy resource. And companies that participate in this initiative are reducing emissions whilst increasing competitiveness. By committing to EP100, corporates are embarking on a process to assess, measure, and optimize their energy use, set a clearly defined target and work towards achieving it, and report and disclose on progress annually. Next slide, please, Harris. Indeed, here are some of the member benefits that you could experience by participating in both the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment and EP100, and that is increased profiling and celebrating of your leadership through the climate group efforts, increased policy and market engagement through climate group events and resources, and finally, additional peer-to-peer learning from climate group and EP100 initiative organized member workshops, roundtables, and events.
If your company or if your business is interested in becoming a signatory to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, that we welcome you to do so. And then if you want to know more about the commitment initiative, or if want to know like how your company situation fit in the requirement of the commitment, yep. So you can have a one-to-one meeting with us, and then so we can walk you through again, and then to understand more about your company background and to suggest you about joining to the commitment. So here is our contact details. So you can save it up, and then so in case if you have any questions, feel free to email us and then to get in touch with us in the future. So I think that is all for today. Thank you for joining again, and then hope to see you soon. And then if you have any questions, just get in touch with us. Thank you very much. See ya. Have a nice day.